Hey y'all, coming to you from Charleston, South Carolina today. This is GovLove, a podcast about local government brought to you by engaging local government leaders. I'm Ben Kittelson, manager at RefTellus and GovLove co-host. We've got a great episode for you today. One of our favorite guests is coming back to talk management and leadership in Albany. But first, the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGO member. Engaging local government leaders is a professional association engaging the brightest minds in local government. And your membership helps support this podcast, so please take the time to sign up today. Now, let me introduce today's guest. Kayla Barber-Perrotta is the Deputy City Manager for the City of Albany, Oregon, a position she's been in since July of 2024. Prior to that, she worked as the Budget and Performance Manager, Budget Manager and Interim Finance Director for the City of Brighton, Colorado. And she's also held analyst roles for the City of Thornton, Colorado, and Royal Oak, Michigan. Kayla, welcome to GovLove. Welcome back, I should say. Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to chat.
Yeah, glad to join you. I will say it is pronounced Albany.
Albany, okay.
Yeah.
I've been in the South too long, I can tell. Because there is an Albany, Georgia,
Yep.
that I've now transplanted. So wow, I've been away from Oregon too long. That's embarrassing.
Yeah, it's too funny because during my interview we actually had a whole conversation about how to pronounce it and how to pronounce the Willamette Valley. So there
Willamette.
with you.
I will never forget. I went to Willamette University. It's Willamette, damn it. It's an easy one to remember. But yeah, I forgot. That's so funny. I just went straight like Southern like accent into Albany. That's great. So we're gonna keep all this in. This is perfect. All right, so we have a tradition, as you know, to start with a lightning round to get to know our guests a little better before we dive into our hard-hitting questions. So for you, what was the first concert that you went to?
It was actually a Jonas Brothers concert. Being a millennial, I went to the Burning Up tour when they had that back in 2008. Got to see Demi Lovato as well at that. So yeah, aged myself there.
Yeah, wow, that's a blast from the past. Yes, that's great. All right, so what was the last? My next lightning round question for you. What was the last movie you saw in theaters or streamed?
I think like half of the country I saw Wicked.
Nice. We just watched that like two or three nights ago to like catch up on Oscar movies. What was your take on Wicked?
Oh my gosh, it was brilliant. I was so excited to see it. I actually had tickets to go see Wicked, the actual musical, in Denver right before I got the job here, and I had to give up those tickets. So It was great to go see the movie. Still want to see the show one day.
Awesome. Very cool. All right, my next lightning round question for you. Cake or pie?
So actually neither. I am hands down a brownie person.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
This is great. I just don't make the choice. Go the third way. The brownies are the better option. If you had all three on the table.
Box.
Yeah. That's innovation right there.
Yeah, there you go.
Awesome. And then my last lightning round question for you. Where do you go for inspiration?
Largely it's the people around me. I get a lot of energy from the people I am working with, my family, my friends. I'm someone who really likes to engage with and help people through, problems or pain points. And so I'm just always constantly talking to people, listening. And then that oftentimes inspires me to read articles or books or whatever I can get my hands on to try to figure out how to help somebody. So
yeah. Awesome. I love that. That's a great answer. So I'll warn I'll prepare our listeners that I really want to talk about your transition to your new role, and I think I said at the top you're about 9 months in, but for our listeners that have not been to, not even 9 months. Okay,
I'm 7 months in.
Okay, for our listeners that have not been to Albany before, can you tell us a little about the city and kind of what they would see if they came and visited you?
Yeah, so Albany is what I would refer to as a mid-sized city. It's got about 60,000 residents. I will say one of the biggest things for me moving here from Colorado was having to reorient myself to size, because here everyone considers Albany to be a really large city, which is very different than what I'm used to. But we've got about 437 employees, so not too much larger than the last city I was at. But we do have truly what I would consider full service, because not only do we have, your fire department, your police, parks and rec, all of those traditional services, we actually also have a transit system and even an airport,
cool.
which was fun to start learning. And then, we're right in the Willamette Valley, so between Portland and Eugene, which I am learning is wine country and also the country where everything grows. I'm so excited to be gardening here. It's going to be so much easier than Colorado. And then, it's really interesting because it feels like some things come full circle, because Albany's going through a lot of sort of transition and growth from being a lot more of that really community that had a lot of farming, very rich, rural history, to really growing a lot. I think when I started, I was told we were the third fastest growing city in Oregon. I don't know if that's still true, but it's interesting.
Yeah. So that definitely probably brings its own like unique challenges for the city. How's maybe as you've gotten to know it a little bit, how's that kind of growth maybe impacting the city operations or kind of the staff as you're getting to know them?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can definitely feel a bit of a tension in the community between people who have been here for their whole lives, which is quite a lot of people here, all the way to people who are newer residents and really looking to, you've got your people who've been here a long time who are looking to hold on to the Albany they grew up with. And then you've got newer residents coming in who want to see, newer amenities, more services. And then you also get this unique challenge in Oregon. Every state I've been in, every time I get there, they tell me they have the worst financial situation and worst state laws. I am going to hands down tell all of you so far, Oregon has been the worst of the 4 states I've worked in. So
really,
yes, it's a lot more constrained in terms of what revenue options we have. And so because of that, the city hasn't really been able to grow staffing in the same way that the community itself has grown. So that's really something that we're working through right now is, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with what has been, 25.7% inflation here over the last couple years? And then how do you plan a budget? How do you plan a staff? For the future. We're right in budget season right now, so that's really on my mind.
That's like top of mind. Yes.
Yeah. I come in the morning, I think about budget. I go through the day, I think about budget, and then think about budget now as well.
Yeah. Then you go home and you dream of budgets and spreadsheets at night.
Yes.
Yeah. I understand. So I definitely want to hear more about kind of some of what you're getting to work on, but to back up a little bit, maybe when you were thinking about, hey, you were still in Brighton and you were thinking about kind of your next step. What was it like about maybe this role or what you were in general, the kind of roles you were looking for as you were searching for kind of that next step in your career? Because this transition, I think, is an interesting one and kind of maybe a difficult one for some folks that go from maybe that doer level to more of a higher level administrator role. So like and having to leave a state you were in and an organization you're in a long time to a new place. Like, what was that kind of search like?
Well, it's going to be really funny because part of the reason that I was kind of ready for this next step is I had been doing budget for a really long time, and I was really kind of ready for that next step to get out of being sort of in the weeds of budget and spreadsheets day to day. I really had felt like I had packed in quite a lot of learning in that arena over the several years that I had been at Brighton and also Thornton before that. Going through COVID was an interesting thing because you basically packed like 5 years worth of learning into like a 2-year period during that.
Yeah.
And I had really gotten to this point where I felt like I wasn't growing in the same way that I had been, was really ready for that next step. And I'd always wanted to be really an assistant city manager, deputy city manager for that next step. I had talked about it extensively with the team over at Brighton, and had really, quite frankly, hoped at some point to move up over there. But being another mid-sized city, you get to a point where you're ready for that next step, and there's just not that alignment in terms of timing. So it became clear I was going to need to look sort of somewhere else to take that next step. And I was very picky about it, coming from an organization that I loved and a job that I loved. I didn't feel like I needed to just, take the first thing that became available. And so I was really only looking in Colorado, Washington, and Oregon, just because I really wanted to be in a community, in a state that aligned with the things that I valued, where I could see myself being happy and living. And particularly, again, being very picky, I have found through my career that I prefer working for what I would consider mid-sized cities. So really between that sort of 40,000, 80,000 residents, too much smaller. And I think you kind of have to be more in the weeds, or maybe you don't necessarily have the resources at your disposal to really do what you'd like to do. And then much larger than that, I kind of feel like you start to feel like a cog in the wheel and a little bit too specialized. And so Albany ended up fitting all of that. It was really, really funny when I came across it, ended up applying, and I kind of thought it was going to be a long shot, because why in the world would they hire someone out of Colorado who doesn't, know anything about about this Oregon community, has never lived there. And then I got that sort of first interview, got to connect with the team. And I remember the first little 15-minute interview, which everybody's a little tiny face sitting in a conference room, and they can probably all see you blown up. But I felt a really good connection with the team. Off of that, I actually ended up telling my husband after that, I think, this might be a real thing. I might actually have a shot here. And it just continued throughout the whole process to really get better and really connect with people. It's just such a warm and inviting team. Our HR director actually sent me like a novel when I accepted the job. And I was like, I need to know about the community and where I'm just going to be looking for housing. And she just sent the most wonderful overview of the entire community. And here's what's great about this area. Here's what you want to think about here. It was really wonderful.
That's amazing to get that. Yeah. That kind of detail. Can you maybe talk more about the recruitment process? Like, how did you get to know, or how did you get to the point where was it just the first impression and everything kind of kept lining up, or was there more that you were trying to learn through that process of, hey, is this the right place for me? That kind of checked your boxes as you were going.
Yeah. I mean, I am always a proponent of, you need to learn about a place. That was one of the big things that I always talked about when I was at Brighton and teaching, in the Performance and Leadership Academy, was the need to make sure somewhere is a good fit, that you're going to get from it as much as you give to it as far as an organization. So throughout the entire interview process, not only was I being interviewed, but I feel like I was trying to interview Albany as well. So, I mean, it was a pretty straightforward interview process. There were 3 rounds. The first one being the all too popular now, virtual 15-minute get to know you lightning round, which I don't even remember what we talked about in that one. I think it was largely just trying to understand why I was looking at the position. But I do remember being incredibly nervous before that one. I think I read their entire strategic plan. Being a budget nerd, as I am, I looked at their budget, some of their financial documents, really just trying to prepare and make sure I could speak specifically, to some pieces for the city. And then was lucky enough to get called back for a second virtual interview. That one was more of the standard 45 minutes, really talking through, specific skill sets, what I brought to the table. Did a whole heck of a lot more research on that one too. And then when I finally got the call to come in and, fly out and do the in-person interview, that's where I think I really honed in on really looking at Albany as a place to live. I actually flew out 2 days early for that so that I could walk around town, get to see it, because I had never been to Oregon. I stepped off the plane for that interview. I had friends who had previously lived in Oregon who, couldn't speak highly enough about it. So I stepped off that plane in Portland. That was my first introduction. I remember thinking that the trees were very large as I was driving down the freeway. And then being slightly surprised as I drove into the county, and there's a giant sign that tells you Lynn County is the grass seed capital of the world. Didn't quite know what I was getting into right there. But the city ended up being really great once I got in. Just an amazing downtown. I went through parks. I went through some of our, featured open spaces, some of the things that I had seen in the research that people were really proud of. And I actually clocked like 15,000 steps each day leading up to my interview.
Wow.
So that's, I was like, I'm going to walk around because I have got to figure out if this is a place that's going to work for me. They were really surprised when I came into those final interviews, which it was 2 panels. And I actually told them about stumbling upon what I have now learned is like a mobile home, but then is owned by this family that had a styrofoam or spray foam company. And so they turned it into this like spray foam mountain with like a Yeti on it. And I had found that it's a real thing. If you go start walking Google Street View in Albany, you will eventually come across it.
That's so funny. Oh my God.
It exists. And I brought that up in the interviews. I'm not sure they believed I had put that many steps in until I was like, nope, I found this. What is this? But yeah, I did a double panel interview there, which I think clearly went pretty well. And that was getting a lot into, I think, the fit and talking through, skill sets again. But also being able to ask a lot of questions of the team, because at that point, I think I met with every single member of the executive leadership team. And so I was really able to ask them like what they were hoping for out of the position. We have an amazing Parks and Rec director who I think gave me a really great answer when I was talking about, what was her biggest pain point or what she was hoping for out of this position. And she kind of talked about their budget process and how it kind of, I wish I could like visually show something over a podcast, but she kind of talked about how it made her feel. And she pulled her arms in, her shoulders slouched, and it was very much this sort of closed off protective position. And that just resonated with me as someone who had come up from budget and had worked so hard to really make budget a positive experience at Brighton. Like that just resonated with me. I really connected with that. And I think from there, I kind of felt like this was probably going to happen. I literally left the interview and told my husband, I think I'm going to get a phone call for this job.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. What about, so obviously one of the key components of this kind of role is like working with the city manager. So how did you get to know them as part of that process? And then even maybe as you've onboarded and got to know how to work together, like what's that kind of been like? Yeah.
Well, we'll start with some very heavy LinkedIn stalking and some I mean, that was definitely my go-to, was starting to look at that. And then I reached out to people who I had connected with through conferences, who were working in Oregon, to kind of pick their brain on what they knew about him, how just trying to get a feel for the dynamic and everything. Obviously asked a lot of questions in meeting him as well and about leadership style. Because in this position, you really have to make sure that you can get along with your city manager. I can't imagine not being able to do that. That would be pretty awful. But I heard so many wonderful things. In my research, I saw a lot of wonderful things. And sometimes you just, there's a good vibe and you have to trust that vibe. It's really funny. I am now really good friends with someone here who was actually another candidate for this position, another finalist. And she described watching Peter and I, Peter being our city manager, talking in the hallway in between the 2 rounds of interviews And she said, I knew you were going to get the job at that moment because you could just tell there was a really good team dynamic there as you guys were talking. And so, yeah, it's a lot of researching, asking questions, but also I think you got to trust your gut and your feeling on some of these things. I have found over the years that has generally put me down the right path. So
that's a great advice. So once you kind of accept and you're starting and over your first, you said 7 months, how have you kind of onboarded? Because it's one thing to walk around the community, do your online research, look at the budget document. It's another to like get to know, the people in the organization and where all the things are and where the bathrooms are, but also just like how to work with people, right? So how have you kind of onboarded in this role and like gotten to know kind of the city as an organization?
Yeah. Well, it's too funny. I just learned the other day that we actually have private bathrooms at City Hall. This whole time I've just been going to the public one, but you learn things every day. But
it's continuous improvement.
Continuous improvement, continuous learning. But it was a lot of talking to people. Anybody can tell you. So we have whiteboards outside of our offices here. And everybody kind of writes their schedules on them for the day just to kind of share those with people. And anybody at Albany would tell you that for the first several weeks there, it was just like boom, 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 going down my calendar of like me being in meetings or tours. I made it a real point when I started out to make sure that I met with every single team at the city. And really being able to ask them questions and do a lot of listening. Like, tell me what you're working on. Kind of talk me through, what are some of the pain points you guys have been dealing with. Tell me a little bit about where you want to go. Really just trying to give them the opportunity to get me oriented. And I mean, I did that from, every member of the executive leadership team all the way down to shadowing frontline employees. I mean, I did ride-alongs with PD, walkthroughs with the fire department, shadowed our utility billing team for a while. That was a fun one because we got some angry people while I was doing that. Really getting to see, that front-facing, public interaction. But for me, it was really trying to learn about every group, but also try to learn about where I could fit in and support them, and really trying to build trust for them because, I'm someone, this is an organization that is very, I think, different from Brighton, where I came from. Brighton had gone through a lot of turnover, between like 2018 and 2021. So there were a lot of new people there. Coming into Albany, we have a lot of people who have been here for 20, 30 years. And so I'm someone coming in to an organization from the outside. So I really had to, I think, make sure that I was setting up and building those relationships so that I could be successful and be supportive of them. And I'd like to think I've done a pretty good job of that in the first 7 months. Well, time will tell. It was a lot of getting out, asking questions, and really trying to build those relationships and learning some really cool things along the way. Like we have over at our our wastewater, water reclamation, not wastewater anymore, water reclamation plant. We actually take our solid waste and turn it into compost that gets used in our parks. We've got our school district using it, a whole slew of other groups that we're sharing that with. But it was just the coolest thing to see. Like this was a whole like employee driven initiative to take that bio waste and instead of putting it in a landfill, turn it into something usable. So just finding cool stuff like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and it takes a lot of work to get the treatment level to the point where you can do it on that land application. Yeah. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
What a fun way to get to know places too, to get out of the office, go tour with folks, go do ride-alongs, and like go see where people are, not just like learn about it on a book or in a meeting. Yeah, it's just
I found that to be so much more valuable than just simply talking to people. Like getting out to the sites and seeing everything. And that's something I actually learned in my budget days.
Yeah.
I remember doing that all the time during budget season, and even outside of budget season when I was at Brighton, was if somebody had a problem or we were trying to work through a solution on something, it was always my preference to go out there, see them where they were at, and connect in their place. Because I always learn so much more when I can see something and experience something, and I remember it a lot better too.
Yeah. That's very true. Yeah. So other than kind of getting to know, the city and your new colleagues, like what else has been kind of part of your portfolio in this role as deputy manager?
Yeah, so it's gonna make me laugh because I just said earlier that I was kind of ready to take that step away from being so in the weeds in the budget and the financials.
Yeah.
And I have actually ended up being quite a lot in the budget and the financials. From a staffing standpoint, we've had quite a bit of turnover in that area. So that ended up being pretty quickly an area that I found to be a pain point for a number of different areas of the organization. So I've been spending a lot of time with that group, really working through how we can set ourselves up for success in the future from a financial standpoint, really working on processes, getting data in there that needs to be in there. And then how do we set up structures? We actually went through over the last 2 weeks interviews for an accounting manager and a budget manager, because those had all been rolled up into one finance manager position, which had turned over several times, causing a lot of issues. And it was largely due to workload. So really working through that. I'm also heavily involved in some of the more sort of cultural structural items, I would say. Worked with our HR director to implement our first ever employee experience survey, to really start to get data on how we were doing as an organization, where we could improve. And that actually led into a whole slew of other conversations where we realized we have a large number of potential retirements looming in the next 2 to 3 years. So now we're starting to have conversations about what does that look like? How do we prepare for that? How do we mitigate some of that? Also really talking through things like technology. I will say one thing that surprised me is I did think going from a city of about 45,000 residents to one of about 60,000 residents, I was thinking I would have the same availability of like technology and resources as I did in Brighton. So it was a little bit of a surprise to me to walk in and kind of find out how many things were being done rather manually. I think because we had a lot of people who, again, had been there, for most of their career, if not all of their career. And so they just had never seen any other options or seen what was out there. So I've been really working through with teams about, how do you, use some software pieces to help make your job more efficient? How can we better use the resources that we're already paying for, in order to make your jobs easier? So really trying to work through a lot of that as well. And then again, because everything comes back to haunt you, I am now on like my third space planning study. I think I've like helped planners redraw city halls in every state I've worked in. So
oh wow, it's just something you end up working on every time. Yeah. Oh wow, that's really funny. Yeah, you could go your whole career and never do that, and you've done it 3 times.
I know.
Oh wow.
So yeah.
Very cool. Well, and I think when I was prepping for our conversation, it looks like in the org chart that the folks reporting to you is mostly internal services. Is that right?
Yeah. So so our central services, that's what we call them here, central services, are largely the group that is funneling through me. And I think that's largely because of, my background, my experience, and really being able to help those groups. But I try to make sure that I'm staying connected with all of our groups. So I do,
for sure.
Once a month, I've got, a standing meeting with each of my directors, to talk through what's going on for them, how we can support them, how we can help them. But also my schedule still kind of looks like that first couple of weeks I was there, where it's boom, 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 boom meetings.
Yeah.
And that's because I feel like if I'm sitting at my desk too long, I'm not doing my job well, because I think it's really about getting out there, connecting people, understanding where we can help assist, and really like breaking down silos so that we can use our resources as efficiently as possible.
Yeah. Okay. So it's interesting. It's kind of come out in some of your answers already, but one of the things I wanted to ask was, you've written for ELGL and you've done lots of presentations about innovation and process improvement, but I'm curious about some of that, how that experience and that kind of background has prepared you for this role. And it's funny that listening to your answers, as you've kind of peppered in some of these concepts into the way you've approached this already. So I'm just curious that kind of your perspective on that.
Yeah, I'm teeing you up for that question, apparently.
Yeah. Apparently.
It's so funny because when you live in that mindset and that space, you can't separate from it, right? I've spent the last several years training people on how to like look at innovating and process improving as a lens, so that it's just something you're doing all the time. So it's not like I can just shut it off. It's coming through all the time. I mean, I've done some very specific things around process improvement and innovation. One of the things that I did, and I can't remember how early I did it, but I sat down with our executive leadership team and introduced them to a storyboard, and actually had them storyboard what their ideal City of Albany looked like in the next couple of years, and really had them go through and rank out what we were doing well, what was most important, what needed improvement. That was a really good insight for me to start understanding where we had some common recognition of challenges, and also helped me understand where we want to go, so I could start to set up some structures to move there. But I mean, I've done everything from helping some of the teams process map through some sticky processes, working through with groups on, standard operating procedures. We're doing a lot of that right now, especially when we figured out how many people we had eligible for retirement in the next couple of years.
Wow. Yeah.
We were like,
got to write all that down. Yeah.
We need to start documenting because we can't afford to overlap every single position here. And like I said earlier, some of these people have been here 20, 25, 30 years. So they have a lot, sitting in their brains that they could exit the organization with. So really working through that, and then also really trying to empower my groups to use some of those skill sets as well. I did get asked when I first started, like, oh, will you just like set up one of those leadership academy things like you did at your last job here, which I had to pretty quickly be like, no. And the reason why is because that worked because of the organization I was in at the time and where they were at, and, sort of this shared common understanding of where they wanted to be. What I have found is for Albany, I think it is much more effective to address this in smaller dosages. There's a lot, I think there's more skepticism in terms of, some change and process improvement. I think as I've learned in my time here, there's been some, starts and stops and on other big initiatives that have kind of eroded a little bit of that trust in being able to innovate. So I'm having to work through a lot of that. What I am also finding is, I've kind of had to step further back and really start even teaching the language around how you think from a process improvement or innovation standpoint. I got really, really excited when an employee who I had never said the words to actually started talking to me about pain points that they were going through. And specifically calling them pain points. I was like, yes, thank you. It's starting to spread. It's starting. Yes. It sounds so ominous, but I promise it's going to be good. Then also throughout it, having to check myself as well. It is incredibly hard to go from an organization that is like fully bought into that to an organization where there's skepticism. And so there were some starts and stops where I think I ran a little bit too fast, and then kind of had to walk myself back and reconnect with people where they were at and where they were ready to be, in order to get things moving forward again. So it's been a lot of self-introspection as well.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And you have to meet organizations where they're at. You can't just copy and paste what you were doing before into a new place, because it's a whole different context, whole different environment. Like, and well, and I know earlier you mentioned some of the things you're working on are like more like organizational culture, organizational development. So it seems like those kind of marry up together too. Like, like how are you thinking about like shifting the organizational culture in, to maybe get closer to where you would like to go?
Yeah, well, and I was so excited today. I think I mentioned earlier, we had a kickoff meeting for our new employee vibe team. So this is a team that I've been like, I've had one of my staff members working on pretty much since I got here. Because I was really surprised that we didn't have like a group of frontline employees that we could kind of check in with, sort of get recommendations on or work on engagement pieces with. So it was a lot of like the executive leadership team sort of coming up with things and then pushing them out to differing levels of success. So this group was really exciting, because it's bringing frontline employees in from across the organization to start talking about how do we engage our employees? What does that look like? How do we improve ourselves as an organization? And I'm a really big proponent of you're going to get the best ideas from the people who they affect. So it was just, it was so good today to see all of those people come into a room and just how excited and empowered and motivated they were. And then to see one of my employees who hadn't always been given the best opportunities to really take something and run with it, to watch her really just thrive and lead that meeting today and just be so excited it was so rewarding.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Are there other like cultural things that or initiatives that y'all have cooking in addition to this? I love employee vibe. That's great. Vibe group. Are there other things that you guys are working on in that space?
I mean, I think it's constantly working on cultural stuff.
Yeah.
I think we've got a number of our departments who are starting to talk more long-term strategy. A lot of stuff coming out of that employee experience survey that we did. Again, we believe that was the first time that the city had ever done it. We had people who had been there for 20 years and had never been asked how they thought we were doing. And so we made sure out of that we shared those results with each group, really closing that feedback loop and inviting them sort of to the table in their areas to talk about and look for ways to address some of the areas we didn't score well on. So things like, I mean, communication, that's one that I think every city I've ever done a survey like this at has
it's always an issue.
Issues with communication. The more you improve communication, the more people want communication. So it's sort of a never ending cycle. But stuff like balance. Balance was actually where we scored the lowest. And we had, out of our respondents, 72% of our employees who were saying, we feel burned out. And that's a really scary number, especially when you're looking down a large wave of retirements, because you're going to have turnover, and burnout can lead to more turnover, and it can put you in a really unstable position if you're not proactive and strategic about it. So even little things like we started tracking extra hours that were worked for salaried employees, putting in, we call it 199 time, so that we can understand, where the workload might not be matching up with the resourcing, where prioritization needs to happen. So even little things like that. I also do now I write a monthly blog in our employee newsletter, really to talk about, everything from what are some of the big decisions that are being talked about or concerns that we're looking at from an executive leadership team level, down to, providing insight on some of the themes that or things that we're hearing out of departments. Really this idea of trying to make it more of an open door and more of a conversation for everyone. That we're kind of all here for the betterment of Albany.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's a fun kind of muscle to, or I don't know, thing to get to do is like talk about, just have an open door of like, here's the things that we're working on. Here's a little
Yeah,
monthly
well,
newsletter from your,
yeah, well, and it was great for me because I will say, it was kind of hard moving into a new position because you go from knowing a place so well. Like I could
Yeah.
spout out every random thing about Brighton and where they'd been and where they were going, and just really felt like an expert there. So coming in and not being an expert anymore, I went hard on trying to learn everything I could. But I think being able to do something like the employee blog is good for me and good for my mental health. Because I enjoy writing. It's one of those things that sort of fills my cup. And so being able to take that and do that is almost like a therapeutic once a month thing that also helps build trust. So it's a win-win all the way around.
Yeah. A win-win-win. Awesome. That's very
Yes.
cool. So what have you been surprised by during this transition, kind of taking on this role?
Yeah. I mean, I think I've mentioned several of them. But I mean, I mentioned earlier the technology piece. I was really surprised to walk in and not see, the same usage of software and technology. That is one we are definitely working through. And I think we're making a lot of headway. We still have a lot of headway or a lot of work to do on that. I also, I think was surprised by the transition process itself. I don't think I realized how much of an impact, changing organizations would have on me, and changing states, to go from somewhere where you were so deeply embedded really in the fabric and the foundation of that organization, and the identity of that organization, to walking into somewhere new was actually incredibly difficult. And I can't emphasize this enough. I think I went through, I don't remember how many stages of grief you're supposed to have, but I went through all of them.
There's all of them. Yeah.
I went through all of them. And then, sometimes you still have days where you're like, you feel a little sad or you miss something or you see something that's happening where you've been and you're like, oh man, I'm not part of that anymore. So that was a little bit rougher of a transition than I thought it would be. I am definitely feeling more at home now and more connected, which I think is helpful, especially as I'm building more relationships with people and starting to get the friends at work, if you will. That's always the question they ask you on the employee surveys of like, do you have a friend at work? Because that's such a good indicator of whether someone's going to be engaged. And I'm finally getting to that point where I have some of those friends at work and feel like I have, people I can talk to and starting to put some roots and foundations, and also feeling like I have answers for things is incredibly helpful. And when I show up to a meeting and I actually know what somebody's talking about is
it's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a big deal. But yeah, I also, moving into a deputy role from a budget and performance manager role was tremendous. I had been doing a lot of stuff in, stretch projects, really learning how to do sort of the assistant or deputy role at Brighton. But to move into that position and lose some of, as you described it, how did you describe it earlier? You did it so wonderfully. Now I'm going to forget, but it's the more doing part of it. I think was hard, particularly the facilitation piece. I didn't realize until I wasn't doing it on a regular basis how much like the teaching and facilitation piece was sort of a fill your cup thing for me. So I've had to work through kind of finding other things to help fill my cup, and I am getting to do some facilitations with some of our groups. I just helped our Parks and Recreation director oversees our Human Relations Commission, and that's a group that has really struggled to figure out how to execute their mission and vision. And so we did some facilitation with them to start putting together a work plan. So little pieces like that are allowing me to get some of that experience, but from that higher level more strategic position.
Yeah. Well, it's also I imagine I don't want to put words in your mouth again, but doing that kind of work from a deputy manager role versus when you're maybe a peer or even like lower than a peer, when you're a budget and performance manager, like there's a different dynamic there of like how do you being a facilitator at this higher leadership role, maybe there's maybe it's harder to draw that conversation out and get folks to participate than when you're kind of that doer role. I don't so yeah, I could totally see like you go from being that person that can get anybody to talk to like, well, I don't know that I want to say this in front of the new deputy city manager.
Yeah, that one's been, you're absolutely right on that. Yeah, going from like being one of the people to, okay, this is our boss. I have seen the skepticism and really had to work at pulling some of that information out. I think one of the things I found that is like really helpful for that though is like being vulnerable and being willing to like share some of the hard stuff for myself or talk through something, and also really maintaining a very positive like attitude and like having a sense of humor. Just the more you can do to humanize yourself, that starts to break down some of that I think skepticism and distrust. There's still a long way to go on that, but I have seen it, and I can see from frontline employees who now feel comfortable popping into my office to ask a question or talk about something. I can see that that's working, and that makes me feel really good.
Yeah, very cool. So I feel like you've given lots of great advice throughout this conversation, but is there
so.
anything else like, for folks that might be making or that want to make a similar transition to you, they're going from, into this kind of role, like any other advice that you would share around, what you've learned or what you would advise someone doing this kind of transition?
Yeah. Well, I think asking a lot of questions is a good one. I felt like I asked a lot of questions of the organization prior to showing up, and through the interview process. But in hindsight, I think I wish I had asked, more questions. I think going from this budget and performance manager role, up to, okay, I'm a finalist on a deputy city manager role. There was a little piece of me that felt like, don't ask too many questions because you might jeopardize. You might
don't ruin it.
Yeah, don't ruin it. Don't ruin a good thing. And so in hindsight, I wish that I had asked more questions. And it's one of those things where I always would teach people, if you're, interview the company, interview the organization, and don't be afraid to ask, because if you're the right candidate, like it's going to work. That fit is going to be there. But I wish I had asked a few more questions, so I wasn't quite so surprised with some of the things around like the technology, and then like flexibility. Because we talked about flexibility. I asked some questions about, are there some opportunities for some flex scheduling? And then when I got to the organization, in my mind, I had one view of that based on the organization I had been in. Kind of got there and realized, okay, people here really like being more in person, and you really got to push them to call you or email you if you happen to be off site on that day. So it's something that we eventually got to a good place on, but it took me a lot longer than I think I would have liked to, ask about some of that flexibility piece once I was in the position. Just because when I looked around me, I didn't see other people doing that. So I think not being afraid to ask those questions. And then also not being afraid to like negotiate. I had never been in a position where I was going to have a contract and, negotiating would be part of the deal. And I will say, having hired someone now who has had that opportunity, I took notes on how they negotiated with me, and there's some things I would have done differently in my own.
Oh, wow.
Namely, probably asking for like more vacation or something like that. Cause I think balance is something that you really have to work on and prioritize. And being in a position like this, that can sometimes be hard to come by, because you are that go-to for so many people, and you want to support them and you want to help them reach their goals, and if you're not careful, you can kind of spread yourself too thin. So yeah.
That's great. Yeah, that's wow. That's great advice.
That was very real, raw advice right there.
Yes, it was. Yes. Oh, it's well, and I can't imagine getting a lesson in negotiation from someone you're hiring. That's
I know,
like, dang,
it, this
would have been great.
I didn't even know that was an option I could ask for.
You're like, wow, yeah.
Mind blown.
Yeah. Oh. So before we wrap up, what's next? What are you working on? That our listeners ought to look out for, that you've got coming down the pipe.
Yeah. So right now, I am kind of a little bit in my own transition. I went really, really hard at the beginning of this position. So putting in a lot of hours learning, getting to know the organization, really, really trying to do everything. And kind of in the last couple of weeks have kind of realized I need to rebalance a little bit here. So one of the things that I'm actually getting back into, that I'm really excited about, because it's one of those fill your cup things, is I had actually started drafting up, writing a what I hope will be a book at some point. Really talking about what I love, which is how you can use culture, and really empowering your people to set up your organization for long-term success. And so I finally, after months of not touching it, I had, several chapters before I got to Albany, and then it kind of sat on a back burner. I finally got to pick it back up again and start working through that. So I'm hopeful that I can actually finish that now. And cool. Then maybe one day someone will think it's, worth publishing, but never been down that road before. So it'll be an interesting new learning experience.
That's awesome. Well, now we have all our listeners will be waiting to order your book when it comes. Yeah.
Now I have pressure. I've told everybody here now, so now I have to make sure I finish it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, Kayla, I have the hardest question for you to end here. If you could be the Gov Love DJ and pick the exit music for this episode, what song would you pick?
Yeah, so I had to think really hard about this one, because literally I don't think anything I'm listening to right now would be appropriate. So actually I'm going to use your first lightning round question for some inspiration, and I'm just going to take everybody back to 2008 when I was in high school at my first concert, and you all can listen to the Jonas Brothers Burnin' Up and enjoy.
Heck yeah. Oh my God, that's great. Perfect. What a way to go out. Kayla, that ends our episode for today. Thank you so much for coming on and talk with me. This has been great, and even though you revoked my Oregonian card by mispronouncing Albany so badly, so I appreciate it.
So awesome.
And then for our listeners, GovLove is brought to you by engaging local government leaders, and the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. You can reach us online at elgl.org/GovLove and at our page on LinkedIn. Subscribe to GovLove on your favorite podcast app, and if you're already subscribed, go tell a friend or colleague about this podcast. Help us spread the word that GovLove is the go-to place for local government stories. And with that, thank you for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government.
Keep